I was immersed in memories, and only years later did I suddenly understand the meaning of that look. Perhaps, in the moment before learning my uncle's name, Christopher truly wanted to treat me as family. But my relationship with the Booth family could help him open a gap for revenge. He spent many years teaching me that family would never betray each other, and that if family was hurt, it should be repaid 100-fold. However, from the very beginning, his promise was woven from lies. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Renzo said, "Valerie, I can see that Christopher likes you. You said that in your previous life, you were killed by someone, and Christopher had a part in it. Perhaps it was because you chose me. I don't dare to keep you tied to me, to take that gamble. You have no connection with the Booth family, and Christopher should know that. So, as long as you leave me, all future dangers will be borne by me alone." I slowly shook my head. Impossible. Be good. No. I stubbornly held his hand. I won't divorce you. You know what? In our previous life, we even had a child, but I didn't get the chance to tell you. Renzo froze. Really? Yeah, maybe we have one now too. He stiffened, staring blankly at my belly. Renzo, I can act in a play with you, but I won't divorce you. A few weeks later, the media broke the news. Well-known entrepreneur Renzo Fisher was rumored to be having marital problems and divorcing his wife. On the same day, photos of me moving out of the villa were posted online by netizens. My best friend Claudia Stone watched me move my belongings into her apartment with excitement. "Valerie, you've finally come to your senses and decided to start a business with me?" I said with a cold face. Men can't be relied on. "Hey, you were calling him Dear Renzo just a few days ago. Tell me what happened." Faced with her eager gossip-seeking expression, I said glumly, "I smeared jam on his bedsheets." "That's it? That's it. We're divorced. So what are your plans now?" "Live on my own." On the third day, I received a call from my uncle. "Valerie, come back tomorrow night, will you?" While holding the phone, I sprayed water on some lilies and said with a smile, "Oh, Uncle, why did you suddenly think of me?" "Well, you're divorced now, right? We can't just watch you suffer out there. We're having a banquet, so we can help you find someone new. Your information is quite up to date. So, are you coming or not?" "I'll be there on time." After hanging up, my best friend looked at me worriedly. "Didn't you cut ties with your parents long ago? What do their affairs have to do with you? Blood is thicker than water. If I don't go to them, they'll always be trying to harm me." In the evening, wearing a black body-hugging mermaid dress, I pushed open the doors of the Booth family mansion. The banquet hall was filled with the clinking of glasses. As soon as I entered, all eyes turned to me, and people began to whisper, "Is that the Booth family's young lady? She doesn't have much presence, does she? Hey, if her parents don't care about her, who do you expect to? Why don't you let your son try?" Climbing up the Booth family tree could save him a decade or more of hard work. As I made my way through the crowd, I turned a corner and heard a familiar voice. "It's been a while." Looking towards the voice, I saw Renzo holding a wine glass, standing among the crowd, smiling and chatting. He had always been dazzling. Hearing about his divorce, many business owners flocked to him, with female companions surrounding him in layers. He must be thrilled. People noticed me, and the chatter quieted. "Mr. Fisher, why don't you catch up first?" Renzo gave me a cold glance, then looked away. "No need. We have no relationship anymore." I casually took a glass of champagne from a waiter and walked over. The passers-by automatically made way, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire if we started fighting. Renzo's deep gaze fell on my moist lips, lingering briefly before trailing down my neck, taking in the beautiful curves of my waist. For a moment, he forgot his lines. I couldn't wait any longer, so I splashed the champagne on his clothes and said with a smile, "Just saying hello, Mr. Fisher. You don't mind, do you?" He took my empty glass, his fingertips reluctantly brushing against the back of my hand, and smiled faintly, "Not at all." I snorted, tossed the glass aside, and turned to leave. I pushed open the balcony doors, wanting to catch some fresh air. To my surprise, someone was already there. And it was someone I knew. Christopher Hart. He was leaning against the railing, the burned half of his face hidden in the shadows, leaving only his handsome profile visible. Valerie, long time no see. My eyelashes trembled slightly, and I tightened my hand hidden behind my back. Long time no see. He chuckled softly. Why so formal with me? I tried to ease my nervous emotions, took a deep breath, and said, why would you think that? I should be the one asking you, where have you been? You blocked my number, huh? You've got some nerve. Just like before, I gave him a playful push. Suddenly, the light from outside the door was blocked by someone. I glanced from the corner of my eye to see Renzo casually leaning against the window, looking over here with a calm expression. Christopher was pushed completely into the darkness. I'm going for surgery. Surgery? He leaned forward slightly, the dim light illuminating his face. The skin that had been burned before was mostly repaired now. Look closely, am I the same as before? I stared at him intently and after a while said, the same. I took a step back, creating distance. I'm happy for you, really. The door suddenly opened, and my uncle led a group of guests in. Come, let me introduce you. This is my niece, Valerie Booth, and beside her is our company's newly signed actor, Christopher Hart. They've known each other since they were little. Actually, I arranged this party to help these two kids settle their lifelong affairs. The surrounding guests were bustling, offering words of flattery. They surrounded Christopher and me, leaving no room to escape. I frowned. Uncle, I don't want to. Christopher put his arm around my shoulders, smiling as he said, don't worry, Uncle Booth. I'll take good care of Valerie in the future. I struggled a bit, realizing his grip was very strong, and felt a bit panicked. Fortunately, after a brief half-minute, he let go of me and smoothly engaged in small talk with the guests. With mixed feelings, I waited until Christopher finished socializing and asked, when did you start getting involved with my uncle? Christopher adjusted his tie leisurely. Only by gaining the Booth family's approval can I marry you. I had other plans, but your divorce saved me a lot of trouble. Looking at his face, I felt he was frighteningly unfamiliar. Christopher smiled. What? Don't you recognize me? Do you feel that I'm different from the Christopher in your heart? Before, I thought Christopher's smile was bright and sunny, that we were from the same world. But now it seems I was mistaken. He stepped forward, forcing me to retreat step by step. Finally, my back was against the glass door. Valerie, this is how I've always been. He pulled out a smile that looked somewhat fierce in the dim light. Originally, I shouldn't have let you go either, but I love you. As long as you come back, we can be like before. You probably don't want to die with Renzo Fisher like in your previous life, right? I shuddered, instantly engulfed by immense fear. He knew everything? Christopher clearly noticed my widened pupils and heavy breathing due to fear. He leaned over me, his hand falling on the doorknob behind me, gently pressing it. The door opened. The light, lively violin music from the party drifted in. The light suddenly became bright. Christopher smiled at me, mouthing the words. Go back, enjoy the party. We'll meet another day. It wasn't until I walked into the crowd that I realized I was covered in cold sweat. The bright, dazzling light made me dizzy. I slowly leaned against the stairs and, following my memory, went up to the second floor. At the end of the corridor was the room I used to stay in. I wanted to go in and rest for a bit. Almost as soon as I pushed the door open, someone covered my mouth and dragged me behind the door. A familiar scent wafted over, and Renzo's low voice poured into my ear, carrying a hint of wine. Where did he touch you? My whole body trembled slightly. Shoulder. Instantly, a hot kiss fell on my shoulder. Renzo patiently and meticulously kissed away the earlier sensation. The fear and nervousness finally faded under his comfort. Standing in the darkness, I asked quietly, are you jealous? A whole vat of jealousy. Renzo's tone was muffled. No one else is allowed to touch you, no one. He was about to bite my shoulder after saying that. Hey! I pushed him away. We still have to go downstairs later. How would you explain teeth marks on my shoulder? Seeing Renzo frown, clearly unconvinced. I said, They'll say I just got divorced and immediately hooked up with Christopher. Do you want to hear such gossip? He was silent for a moment. No, I don't. Then control yourself a bit. I rested my head near his heart, hearing his strong heartbeat, and said, Christopher has teamed up with my uncle, and they've even guessed my situation. They're prepared for your plans. Are you confident? Valerie. If the Booth family suffers severe damage because of this, what will you do? So that's what he was worried about. I held Renzo's large hand. My parents' marriage was a business arrangement. They hated each other. The year I was born, they dumped me with my uncle and moved overseas separately. My uncle used me as a tool to curry favor for the family. If it weren't for you, I might have already been married off to a 70-year-old man. So, don't worry about me. I hooked his ring finger, noticing he had put his wedding ring back on at some point, feeling warmth in my heart. If the Booth family really falls, it's because my uncle did unethical things. He'll deserve it. In the following months, I returned to my life as a working person. After all, since becoming an adult, I hadn't taken a penny from the Booth family, relying solely on my own hard work and frugal studying to support myself until now, having acquired a skill to make a living. Except for being forcibly called back by my uncle to arrange a blind date with Christopher, my life was relatively peaceful. Claudia was extremely dissatisfied with this. You've already cut ties with them, why do you still have to obey their every word? I didn't explain. Christopher knew about my situation. As long as I didn't comply with his wishes, he would instigate my uncle to create obstacles for Renzo. Before Renzo could ruin them both, I had to keep them in check. Moreover, Christopher gave me the choice of the date location, and I chose a busy area during the daytime, which was relatively safe. Claudia liked to watch TV. Recently, Renzo often appeared on financial channels. She cursed every time she saw him. What a beast in human clothing! Valerie, you must let me approve your second marriage groom. She held the remote control, pointing at Renzo's handsome face as if she had Parkinson's, her voice breaking. Men like this, you can tell at a glance they're no good. Due to Claudia's strong aversion, I had to meet Renzo secretly. In the depths of winter, just after a heavy snowfall. I was wearing a thick sweater, carrying a garbage bag, emerging from the corridor. Renzo's car was parked downstairs, and despite the cold, he was waiting for me outside the car. He was wearing the wool coat I bought him and the scarf I got him too. Come here. He beckoned to me. I bounced over happily, joyfully throwing myself into his arms, making a shushing gesture. Keep your voice down, let's go to the car. What's wrong? My best friend now thinks you're the world's biggest jerk. Like a thief, I dragged him into the car. The car lights went out, and darkness fell around us. Only the streetlights in the distance cast shadows on the pristine snow. Wrapped in my thick down jacket, I rummaged around for a while and pulled out a pair of knitted gloves from my pocket. These are for you. Renzo smiled, accepting my gift seriously. Mrs. Fisher, I have many pairs already. You don't like them? I reached out to take them back, but he quickly pulled them away. Thank you, I like them very much. Actually, Renzo and I didn't have much in common to talk about, but we always had endless conversations. I lazily leaned on his shoulder, nuzzling against him. My best friend says if I dare to marry someone like you for my second marriage, she'll what? Those words were too crude, so I didn't dare say them, skipping over it anyway. Something really disgusting will happen. I sighed. I can already imagine her beating me up. Renzo laughed out loud, holding my hand. Why don't you choose someone else then? Renzo! I fiercely pinched him. What nonsense are you talking? He lowered his eyes, silently enveloping my hand in his. His fingers were long and perfect, large enough to encompass both of my hands. I want to stay with you, I said glumly, my forced cheerfulness instantly deflating. I don't know what's been going on lately, but I keep having nightmares. Every time I dream that Renzo says he wants me to live well on my own. When I wake up, my eyes are swollen from crying. Valerie, I mean if. He paused. One day, if I suddenly leave you. Before he could finish, my tears dropped onto the back of his hand, interrupting him. A sigh came from above, and Renzo hugged me, stroking my head. It's just a hypothetical. Even hypotheticals are scary. My voice was muffled. I'm the kind of person who, having never received parental love since childhood, likes whoever is good to me. It was like that with Chris, and at first with you too. But later it became different. When you like someone, you feel happy, but also sad. With you, it's not just that. I want to make you happy more. When I see others have something, I want to say you should have it too. I care about what I say, afraid of making you unhappy. My emotions seem to be tied to yours, so when you talk about separating, it hurts me. Renzo kissed my hair and sighed, Valerie, you're in love with me. Then can we not separate? You said you wouldn't refuse my requests. He made a sound of agreement, patting my back soothingly, okay, we won't separate. Early the next morning, I came out of the bedroom with swollen eyes. Claudia had a pork chop biscuit in her mouth. Did you cry last night? Can you get me an ice pop? She got up and went to the kitchen, pulling out an expired old ice pop from the bottom of the fridge and pressing it against my eyelids. Last night, I saw you get into a luxury car. I kept silent, holding the ice to my eyes. She rolled her eyes, fine, to return to your previous choice, and got humiliated by your ex-husband, right? Crying over a man in your blanket every day, look at how pathetic you are. It's not like that. He's quite good. Stop right there. She dug in her ear, if I hear you say anything good about him again, I'll throw you out. I gave up struggling and picked up my bowl to drink some soy milk. I stared blankly at my best friend with puffed cheeks. She said, swallow it, did your brain run off with that man? Can't even eat properly now? I spat it out exactly as it was, and before she could scold me, I had already run to the bathroom to retch. She came over with a glass of water, her face covered in soy milk, cursing while patting my back. Jesus, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me, let me call in 911. I grabbed her, don't. Oh come on, let go, do you know how awful you look? I held onto her tightly and said, I'm pregnant. What nonsense. She suddenly stopped talking and said, oh God. A few minutes later, she dragged me into a taxi. Christopher called, Valerie, where are you? Only then did I remember that I was supposed to date him today. I'm sorry, I have an emergency. Where are you? Send me the address? Claudia knew I didn't like him, so she snatched the phone and turned it off. Turning it off was good, it was safer. I sighed and said, keep this a secret for me, don't tell your family. I'm afraid the Booth family will find out. She was sulking and didn't want to talk to me. After a while, she asked again, are you planning to give birth like this? Yes. All right. You give birth, I'll be the child's aunt. Women can hold up half the sky, the two of us can surely raise a child. The radio in the taxi was broadcasting news. We listened for a while and then fell silent. The Booth family was in trouble. It was revealed this morning. It involved a serious construction site accident from a long time ago. The Fisher family, as the partner at the time, was also affected. My best friend held my hand, looking at me with concern. I shook my head, it's okay. I didn't expect Renzo to act so quickly. The other scandals that came out about the Booth family were like straws piling up on a camel's back, waiting for the last one to make the camel collapse. Thinking of my previous life, when my uncle, as the mastermind, instigated Mr. Anderson to cause that explosion, my heart, which had been suspended for a long time, gradually eased a bit. This time, it was 10 years earlier. Renzo's business empire was at its peak, and my uncle's accumulated wealth hadn't grown to a terrifying degree. Hopefully, such things wouldn't happen again. There weren't many cars on the road today, and the driver was very steady. Halfway through the journey, my eyelids felt heavy. So I decided to rest briefly on Claudia's shoulder, wake me up when we get there. Before I heard her answer, I passed out. After a while, a voice came from far away. Valerie, open your eyes now. The harsh sound of metal scraping woke me from my sleep. I felt my limbs were heavy. Slowly opening my eyes, I saw cement pipes, and Claudia leaning against them. The wind blew, bringing the pungent smell of industrial oil and earthy soil. I got up from the ground in confusion. Claudia was kicking her legs in vain, with a creaking sound coming from behind her. Oh my God, thank God. Quick, come and untie me. Realizing that we were in an unfamiliar place and had been tied up, I quickly walked over, squatted down, and saw the thick rope binding her. Familiar memories flooded back. I suddenly looked up, surveying the surroundings, and cold sweat instantly dripped down. Wasn't this the abandoned factory where I died in my previous life? The rope was tied in a dead knot, impossible to untie, only to be worn down. The creaking sound of steel bars echoed throughout the entire building. Claudia cursed, "How dare they kidnap me, they must have a death wish." The rope showed no signs of fraying after a long time of rubbing. She leaned back against the stone slab, exhausted. "Valerie, stop struggling. They tied me up but not you, which means their target is my family. While no one's here, you should quickly run and call the police." I smiled bitterly. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid I've implicated you this time." "What do you mean?" Before she finished speaking, Christopher's voice suddenly came from behind. "Your best friend is really noisy." Claudia tried to look, but I quickly covered her eyes. Turning around, I stared at Christopher and said, "She knows nothing. Let her go." Claudia couldn't hold back anymore. "Damn you, I've told you clearly, my surname is Stone, I'm from the Stone family. You dare to kidnap me? When my old man finds out, he'll make you pay." After hearing this, Christopher's face darkened. I said, "You heard her. Our business doesn't need to involve the Stone family." Claudia's father was in politics, and her brother was a police officer. She had always been fearless since childhood. If something really happened to her, no one would survive. Christopher threw me a utility knife. "Cut the rope, but you're not allowed to move. Otherwise, no one will leave here alive." I hurriedly picked it up and freed Claudia from the rope's restraint. "Don't look at anything, just go home and stay there." Claudia frowned and asked quietly, "Is this a trick?" "I'll definitely call the police when I get out." "Calling the police is good," I said softly, "but I feel like they're at the end of their rope and aren't afraid of the police anymore." Remembering the explosion from my previous life, I gave my best friend a push. If one could leave, that was better than none. She gripped my shoulder. "Valerie, you must wait for me. I'll get the police to rescue you." With that, she ran out without looking back. In the empty surroundings, only Christopher and I were left. I stood up, meeting Christopher's gloomy eyes. "What do you want to do?" "Why did you go to the hospital?" he asked in return. "Stomach pain, to get medicine." Christopher's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Valerie, don't treat me like a fool." He grabbed me and dragged me to the window, gripping my chin to look down. "Let's see who's arrived." Downstairs, a man was standing in front of my uncle. I immediately recognized the man as Renzo, and my heart tightened. Christopher chuckled softly. "When the police arrive, they'll find Renzo's corpse. Your uncle won't escape either." My heart was racing, my fingertips were cold, and I was trembling slightly. But at this moment, the more concern I showed for him, the more dangerous it would be. I simply closed my eyes. I'm divorced from him. Whatever happens to him has nothing to do with me. Is that so? Christopher coldly looked downstairs and said, "Uncle Booth, break one of his legs." Bang! After a burst of noise, blood was seeping from Renzo's thigh. He had fallen to one knee, looking up in the direction of Christopher and me, his face pale. "Christopher, I'm here, let her go." Christopher ignored him and said to me, "Valerie, are you happy?" I was frozen, unable to say a word. "Uncle Booth, the second leg." I suddenly grabbed his hand, trembling as I said, "No, please." Christopher's smile suddenly disappeared, his fingers turning white from gripping so tightly. Renzo's eyes were dark, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't scare her." Christopher's eyes were terrifyingly cold. He looked at Renzo challengingly, then lifted my chin and kissed me the next moment. His dry lips and fierce force made me nauseous, involuntarily struggling violently. He said, "Do you want him to die?" I froze, motionless. Christopher pressed his lips tightly against mine, rubbing. Nausea rose from my stomach, and I suddenly pushed him away, kneeling on the ground, vomiting uncontrollably. "Do it," Christopher ordered coldly. Suddenly, another sound came from downstairs. My mind went blank, and I scrambled to the window. Renzo. The imagined scene of him lying in a pool of blood didn't appear. It was my uncle. He had been shot in the back and was lying on the ground. Renzo's left hand was dripping blood. Not far away, a team of armed police was swarming in, quickly surrounding the area. Christopher's face changed, and he suddenly grabbed my collar, retreating behind a concrete pillar on the second floor. Outside the window, the police were shouting at Christopher. He hadn't expected the police to arrive so quickly. Christopher gripped me, hiding in a blind spot where the snipers couldn't see, and shouted, "I have explosives. Let Renzo come in to see me. Otherwise, I'll die with her." I opened my mouth, gasping for air, feeling my vision darken. "Christopher, calm down." "I am calm. In your previous life, you were willing to die with Renzo." "What, it's not okay with me?" I desperately slapped at his hand. I don't want to." Christopher's tone became increasingly agitated. "I could have salvaged everything. But why did you have to come back too? Give me back the original Valerie Booth." I futilely reached out my hand, the light before my eyes dimming. "Christopher Hart." A familiar, deep voice came from a few steps away. "I'm here, let her go." The pressure on my neck suddenly disappeared. I bent over, coughing violently, my eyes blurred with tears, looking at Renzo desperately, instinctively reaching out to him. The blood on his leg had already dried, his hand was wrapped in bandages, looking even more battered than in the previous life. From the moment he stepped onto the second floor, his eyes were fixed on me, afraid something might happen to me. Christopher pulled me back a few steps, taking out a knife and holding it to my throat. "Renzo, this time, let's play something different." He pointed to a leather jacket not far away and said to Renzo, "Put it on." I was all too familiar with that jacket. "No, don't wear it." I struggled violently, my voice breaking for the first time. "You can't." Christopher laughed excitedly, as if he had gone mad. "Valerie, in the previous life, Renzo dared to die with you in his arms. What about you? How much do you love him?" "No." I frantically scratched at Christopher's hand. He gripped me tightly, sneering. "You think he can beat me? What use is it if he protects you well? If you don't come out, I can still open the door and tie you up. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Today, if he doesn't die, you will." Renzo hadn't heard our whispered conversation. "Keep the knife away from her, I'll put it on." "Renzo, leave." I cried hoarsely, "Please." As if he hadn't heard, Renzo stared at the blood droplet from the knife tip on my skin, quickly putting on the jacket. Beep. The countdown began. I closed my eyes in despair. Christopher suddenly pushed me forward. "Valerie, choose one." I stood between the two men, crying as I took a step towards Renzo, but he stepped back half a step. "Valerie, don't come closer," Renzo warned solemnly. I stood still, not daring to take another step. I wasn't afraid of death, but at this moment, choosing Renzo in front of Christopher would only intensify Christopher's emotions. It might even trigger the bomb prematurely. "Valerie, admit it, you only love yourself. You're just like your uncle, selfish and cold-hearted." Christopher sneered, making sarcastic remarks from the side. Renzo retreated to the window, glanced at me, and then spoke. "Christopher, I'm very sorry about your father's incident. You're not worthy of mentioning my father." Christopher, who had been watching the commotion, was suddenly enraged and stepped forward. "Do you rich young ladies and gentlemen born with silver spoons have any sincerity at all? But your father, at that time, did indeed violate regulations by not wearing a safety helmet. We also provided appropriate compensation." "Shut up." Renzo coldly curled his lips into a sarcastic smile. "You're nothing but an incompetent fool." I was trembling all over. This world had gone mad. Every word Renzo said struck Christopher's weak spot. Did he have a death wish? Christopher pulled out a lighter from somewhere and smashed it on the ground. Instantly, a raging fire broke out. The smell of machine oil lingering in the air turned out to be what Christopher had already poured. "It's you who ruined my life." Christopher, with bloodshot eyes, walked towards me. His face, not yet fully healed, now looked terrifying in the flames. Valerie, why didn't you choose me? If you had told me earlier that you didn't like disfigured faces, I wouldn't have been so harsh on myself. A bucket of cold water poured over my head. It really was him. You've gone mad. Yes, how else could I use your guilt to find out about Renzo's whereabouts? Christopher, who had been lying low for years, finally tore off his gentle facade, revealing his obsessive and crazy side. His laughter was like a broken bellows, harsh and unpleasant to hear. Valerie, if you had chosen me, it wouldn't have come to this. Now, you can only blame yourself. Let's go to hell together. He pulled out a remote control. Without thinking, I turned and threw myself at Renzo, hugging him tightly. Valerie! Renzo shouted angrily, and the next moment, bang! Accompanied by the crisp sound of shattering window glass, I couldn't hear anything anymore. Buzz, buzz. The sharp ringing in my ears was like a needle, constantly stimulating my brain. In front of me was Renzo's pale face, saying something to me. I felt as if I had been blown to pieces. My whole body was numb, without strength. But dying together with him, I wasn't afraid at all. Not afraid? Then why was I crying? The deafness lasted only for a moment. The next second, a flood of shouting voices, like an atomic bomb, suddenly poured into my ears. Suspect has been shot dead. Body found on the second floor of the abandoned factory. Team 1 reporting, detonator intact, hostages confirmed safe. No other suspicious explosive devices found at the scene. Fire situation severe, notify relevant personnel to evacuate hostages quickly. As I was being carried away, I looked back and saw Christopher lying on the ground, his back to me. He's dead. A hand covered my eyes. The cold air dispelled the smell of smoke in my nostrils. Police sirens rose and fell. Red and blue lights flashed, reflecting the half-set sun. My legs gave way, and I fell to my knees in the snow, shaking uncontrollably. Claudia spotted me kneeling in the snow at once and shouted, Valerie, get up, you're pregnant, don't crawl around on the ground. Renzo, who was helping the police defuse the bomb nearby, suddenly stiffened and turned to stare at me intently. Before Claudia could reach me, he took off his leather jacket, picked me up without a word as I was still talking to my friend, and walked towards the car with an expressionless face. Hey, who do you think you are? You can't just take her without saying anything. Bang! The car door shut out Claudia's protests. He put me in the back seat and got in himself, glaring at me gloomily. I suddenly felt a bit scared and shrank into the corner. Don't look at me like that, I'm scared. You know to be scared now? You dared to throw yourself at me. Did you think we were playing a game of duck and cover? After a brief silence, he berated me harshly. Renzo had never spoken to me in such a severe tone before, and I immediately burst into tears. The bomb was on me. He was so angry that the veins on his forehead were bulging. What if Christopher had pressed the button? Seeing he was about to speak again, I closed my eyes and fell into his arms. Oh no, I fainted from shock. Renzo choked, took a deep breath, and the veins on his forehead throbbed visibly as he held back. He suddenly hugged me tightly, and it was only then that I noticed his hands were shaking. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that earlier. He ruffled my hair, nuzzling me, trying his best to level his voice. I was originally planning to jump out of the window. That way, even if the sniper failed, the explosion wouldn't have hurt you. But why did you rush over to hug me? I've never seen you with such strength before. I didn't think that much. In TV shows, when there's a bomb, people always duck and cover. I couldn't very well hug Christopher, could I? You. Renzo was speechless, not knowing what to say. Thankfully, we were both still alive. Have all your wounds been bandaged? I asked. Yes. I don't believe you. Let me see. Valerie, he said, caught between laughter and tears, we'll talk about this when we get home. We're an old married couple now, what are you shy about? Claudia's voice came through the glass, muffled. Yes, that's right, I suspect my friend is being domestically abused. Her man kidnapped her. You have a friend in the Women's Federation who can handle this, right? As she spoke, She yanked open the car door. Light poured in. I was pressed tightly against Renzo. Claudia, holding her phone, stared at us expressionlessly for 3 seconds, then suddenly closed the door. When Renzo and I had our wedding ceremony, Claudia sat at the main table. She seemed to have barely eaten anything. When we came to toast her, Renzo said politely, "I used to hear Valerie talk about you often. She said if she were to marry me a second time, something bad might happen." Under his inquiring gaze, she recalled her bold words from back then. She looked at me, and I looked at her. We were both speechless. I had just mentioned it casually, who knew Renzo had such a good memory? Claudia smiled and raised her glass. "Well, that's all in the past. Let me just wish you both a lifetime of happiness." Renzo smiled slightly. "Thank you." After the toast, I followed closely behind Renzo, muttering, "That's all in the past. Why did you bring it up?" He laughed. I was curious. Really curious? Yes. I hesitated for a while, then suddenly grinned. "Come closer, I'll tell you secretly." I hugged him and whispered in his ear. Renzo just looked at me, his eyes so tender they could melt. After the wedding banquet, guests could enjoy themselves at the seaside resort. In the evening, I took off my wedding dress, put on loose clothes and a floppy sun hat, and was led by Renzo, bouncing along the beach. "You always said you'd take me to the beach before, but we never went." "Before, you mean?" "Oh. I mean when you were 38, I blurted out. Renzo frowned slightly. "That's a bit old." "Not old at all." I smacked my lips as if savoring the memory. "You were very handsome at 38 too, just a bit more reserved than now, and couldn't resist being flirted with." The 38-year-old Renzo had gained some maturity, but was still heart-throbbing to a crazy degree. Renzo seemed lost in thought, and for the rest of the time, he seemed a bit distracted when talking to me. As a result, I suffered that night. I never imagined he could be jealous of himself. The night deepened. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, falling on his profile. Renzo had already fallen asleep. I gently stroked his face, feeling a warmth in my heart. Once, I had countless times held the hand of the 38-year-old Renzo, sighing, if only we had gotten together earlier. For a whole decade, we had lived as two painful strangers. During those 10 years, I think I must have had feelings for him too. In the deep of night when he quietly covered me with a blanket, for a moment, I wanted to hold him tight and say, "Let's reconcile." But Christopher's accident had already become a thorn in my heart. Those stirrings that even I was unwilling to acknowledge, each time they occurred, the thorn would pierce deep into my heart, reminding me that Renzo had once harmed my family. Perhaps because it had been suppressed for so long, when the misunderstanding was cleared up, love gushed forth, letting me experience a brief but romantic time of passionate love. I had liked him for longer than I thought. "Valerie, why are you awake?" Renzo's voice was still husky from sleep. I cupped his face and leaned in, placing a very light kiss on his lips. "I love you." Beneath my palm, Renzo's heart began to race again. This man still can't resist being flirted with. "I love you too." He caught my retreating lips, taking control and deepening the kiss. I was overwhelmed by his sudden passion. "Hey, what's gotten into you?" "I just had a dream." "Oh." Renzo opened his eyes, hiding some indiscernible emotion, like a black storm about to break. "I dreamed of our previous life." I held my breath. "Really?" He brushed away my messy hair, looking at me like a precious treasure. "Valerie, I'm so grateful we have a chance to start over." The night was still long, the moonlight shy, and the wind lingering. A warm fragrance drifted, the curtains blown by the wind struck the wind chimes in the corner. It was the sound of heartbeats rising and falling. I became a gentle sea, embracing the moon, softly whispering, "When did you start liking me?" "When we got married?" The moon said, "No, I've liked you for a long, long time." Renzo Fisher's perspective from his previous life. As dusk fell, the secretary poked her head in from the doorway. She had makeup on and was carrying her bag, looking ready to go on a date with her boyfriend. However, she hesitated to leave, feeling awkward since her boss was still in the office. Renzo snapped out of his focus on the complex documents and said, "You can go now. Be safe on your way home." The secretary looked relieved. All right, Mr. Fisher. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. He had heard this phrase many times today. From the moment he walked into the office in the morning until the end of the workday in the evening. But Renzo glanced at his silent phone, feeling a twinge of bitterness. He hadn't received the birthday wish he was hoping for. Looking at the cold boxed meal on his desk, he felt weary and called home. Just a few hours ago, he had told the maid Dana that he wouldn't be coming home tonight. Because of the temperature drop today, he didn't want Valerie to stubbornly come out in the cold because of him. Mr. Fisher? Dana answered the phone. Are you coming home for dinner? Where's Valerie? Dana hesitated for a moment. The madam, she went out. Okay, I see. After hanging up, Renzo just sat there, staring aimlessly at the empty office. He opened his social media and, sure enough, Christopher's provocative post was there as expected. As if to torture himself, Renzo stared at the photos, looking at them over and over again. Valerie's hands inserting candles, her smile as she held the cake asking him to make a wish, the carefully prepared gift, and blue roses. Renzo thought, I used to have that too. Come to think of it, he should have known Valerie even earlier than Christopher did. It's just that Valerie didn't know about it. The first time he saw her, she was just a little girl. Crouching in the bushes, crying. That afternoon, Renzo had been beaten by his stepmother and was sitting in a rocking chair by the bushes, sunbathing. The little girl poked her head out from a small hole in the bushes, her eyes full of tears, and asked, Big brother, did you hear me crying just now? Renzo looked at her tear-stained little face, took out a tissue, and asked, Why were you crying? They said I'm a wild child. At that time, Renzo's forearm had a large red burn from his stepmother's hot water, which was still throbbing with pain. He thought to himself that he might also be considered a wild child. He was silent for a moment, then took out a piece of candy from his pocket. It's okay, I won't laugh at you. With candy to eat, Valerie quickly forgot about crying. Little girl Valerie was very easy to console. Knowing that the big brother next door had candy, she would crawl over here whenever she felt wronged. Later, her pockets started to contain burn ointment, medicine, and band-aids. She called it payment for Renzo. On a sunny afternoon, Valerie crouched next to Renzo, looking at the new wounds on his body, and asked, Brother, why do they always hit you? Renzo said, Maybe because they hate me. Ever since his mother died and his father remarried, Renzo hadn't had a single good day. Before, he had always endured it this way, not knowing when he would see the light. Perhaps he should have died from one of those beatings. Never to wake up again. I think you're very nice. Valerie sensed his mood and hugged his leg, patting it. Valerie likes you. This force was as light as a feather. Meeting Valerie's clear and innocent gaze, Renzo felt a pang in his heart, and something came alive within him. He thought, if he died, she might be sad, right? Later, he began to fight back. That place also became their secret base. Valerie gave him a birthday celebration once. A flattened little cake, with broken candles, and firewood soaked in water that couldn't produce sparks. Valerie cried in frustration, I hate my uncle, he lied to me. But Renzo held the cake like a treasure. Thank you, I love it. There couldn't be a better birthday gift than this. Valerie was a person with an overwhelming sense of guilt. She hugged Renzo and gave him a soft kiss. Brother, happy birthday, be happy forever. In the future, Valerie will buy you big cakes. Renzo kept these words in his heart. And in his mind, he constructed a beautiful picture. For him at that time, it was like an unattainable dream, sweet and beautiful. Valerie also said that the next day, she would give him a big gift, and told him to make sure to wait for it. That night, he was beaten severely again. This time his stepmother had drunk some wine and lost control. Renzo lay on the ground, his vision darkening, vomiting blood incessantly. His usually indifferent father finally lost his temper. Renzo listened, feeling hopeless. Since his mother's death, no one in this family cared about him anymore. His father, fearing he might die at home and cause rumors, sent people to take him to a hospital abroad that very night. Renzo grabbed his father's trouser leg, speaking brokenly, Can we leave tomorrow instead? He still remembered Valerie's instructions and their unfulfilled promise. But no one would listen to his pleas. He didn't know how Valerie would fare without him, so he worked hard to improve himself. After years of planning, he returned from abroad and took over his father's company, and used every means to marry Valerie. On their wedding day, the girl he had been thinking about for so long looked at him coldly. It was then that Uncle Booth revealed the truth. "Ah, it's all my fault. That time when Mr. Fisher sent people to pick up my artist, the one who had an accident on the way, that was Valerie's ex-boyfriend. I didn't think she would care so much about this matter. No one had ever told him. He thought marrying Valerie was saving her. In Valerie's eyes, he was a villain who used his power to pressure her, forcing her to marry him through her uncle. It was all wrong. Valerie had someone she liked, named Christopher Hart. Renzo still went to the hospital. The divorce agreement was placed on the passenger seat. Watching Valerie walk out of the hospital, he said reluctantly, "Today is also my birthday." The big cake and birthday gift promised years ago, Renzo wanted to try again. As expected, Valerie avoided him at all costs. When speaking, she didn't even want to look at him. The phrase "let's get a divorce" was stuck in his throat, unspoken. Renzo made many excuses for himself, such as, "She hasn't given me that big cake she talked about before. It's better to let go after she remembers and fulfills her promise." But he waited, and it never came. They seemed to have become strangers living under the same roof. Renzo knew she despised him, so he rarely went home. One day, it was raining outside, and suddenly the name Valerie popped up on his phone. Renzo could hardly believe it, and opened his phone as if in a trance. A very short sentence, "Are you coming home today?" His lifeless heart suddenly came alive. He hesitated for a moment, typed yes, then deleted it and wrote, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." After that, there was no further response. Renzo began to regret it, to the point where he was a bit distracted during meetings. After work, he went home. He parked the car downstairs and hesitated again. Wait a bit longer, wait until Valerie falls asleep, to avoid another argument. A song was playing in the car. How much further to enter your heart? How much longer to get close to you? He held the steering wheel, his wedding ring on his ring finger gleaming in the dark night. His heart felt bitter. Much later, he stepped into the night and pushed open the door to his home. Dana heard the noise and came out. "You're back." Then she made a shushing gesture at him. Madame fell asleep on the sofa. Renzo frowned. "The sofa?" He looked over. A small dark shadow was curled up in the corner of the sofa. The blanket had fallen to the floor. "She waited for you until now," Dana said softly. Renzier's heart tightened. "Why?" "She said she wanted to make up for your birthday, just mentioned it, but then changed her mind." Dana pointed to the cake on the table, "But I saved it for you. Madame made it herself, planning to send it to your office tomorrow." Renzo looked at the cake with a small bite missing, and a warm current abruptly flooded into the cracks of his heart. It hurt. Yet it made him willingly sink into it, enduring the torment. Renzo knew he could never bring up the divorce again. Any small kindness from Valerie was enough to crush all his resolve. "Dana." Suddenly, a murmur came from the sofa. The person suddenly stirred. Renzo froze, like a ghost exposed in the light, with nowhere to hide. Valerie's gaze fixed directly on him, and she was stunned for a moment when she saw him. The two looked at each other wordlessly. Only Dana was speaking. "Mr. Fisher just got back and hasn't eaten yet. I see there's cake on the table, and you made it, but can't finish it all." Valerie had just woken up and hesitated for a long time before grabbing the blanket and standing up from the floor. She walked barefoot across the living room. Renzo wanted to remind her to wear shoes but felt he had no right to do so, so he remained silent. Valerie stopped as she passed by him and said awkwardly, "The cake is too sweet, I don't like it." You can do whatever." She then walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and even locked it with a click. Dana was at a loss. "Mr. Fisher, what do you think?" Renzo sighed silently. "Cut me a piece. I'll eat and then leave." In fact, the cake wasn't sweet at all, it was just right. The rich milk flavor recklessly collided in his mouth, and the cake base was perfectly soft. Only the fruit on top, he didn't like, but he ate it anyway. Renzo ate 2 pieces. He finally stood up reluctantly. Dana quickly took out a takeaway box, packed up all the leftovers, and stuffed it into his hands. Renzo wanted to refuse, but Dana stopped him. "Take it, Mr. Fisher. It's from your own home, and it's something you like. Madam will be happy." Renzo felt that continuing to live like this was actually quite good. No matter what, at least he still had a home. Many familiar people advised him that life shouldn't be forced, and that it would be easy to divorce and find someone who truly cared for him. But Valerie still wore their wedding ring and never spent the night out. She just couldn't get any closer to him. Moreover, it was he who had harmed her ex-boyfriend. It wouldn't be right to let her bear the label of a divorcee on top of that. Renzo made the best of a bad situation and maintained their marriage for many years. In the 7th year, problems arose at work. The company fell into crisis. He originally had enough energy to take care of Valerie, but lately, he felt stretched thin. One day, after finishing a meeting, he realized he had missed a call from Valerie. When he called back, Valerie said, "It's nothing now, you can continue with your work." Worried, he called Dana. "Oh, the madam had a stomachache earlier, but she's seen a doctor and is much better now." Then he heard Dana rambling on about how Valerie had been busy starting a studio with her best friend lately, was under a lot of pressure, and her mood wasn't good. The doctor said it was stress-induced gastric ulcer and she needed to adjust her emotions. Renzo thought a lot about it. He could cater to her every whim and buy her anything she wanted. But the one thing he couldn't provide was emotional value. Valerie hated him. Renzo asked around, and finally his secretary suggested, "Why don't you get her a puppy?" He carefully selected a fluffy white puppy. It looked very much like Valerie when she was young. With a gentle and clingy personality, it lay in his arms, sticking out its tongue happily. Renzo's expression softened, instinctively feeling that Valerie would like it. Sure enough, that day, Dana called to say, the madam played with it all afternoon, bought a lot of dog food and cans, and even learned to knit a scarf for it. You really understand her. Christopher's social media hadn't been updated for many days. Renzo thought that the puppy must have stolen Valerie's attention. It really was a good puppy. One night, he got drunk. After finishing the dinner party, for some inexplicable reason, he went home. Because that night at the dinner table, all the men were married. Throughout the meal, their wives' calls never stopped. Although they complained, their expressions couldn't hide their pride. Renzo thought, I have a wife too, why can't I go home? He staggered through the door, fumbling in the dark as he walked forward. On the rare occasions when he stayed at home overnight, Renzo would sleep on the couch. This time, following the familiar route, he kicked over something, followed by barking. It sounded both angry and wronged. The lights quickly came on. Valerie stood in the living room, bleary-eyed and wearing pajamas. The puppy whimpered as it ran over to her, as if tattling. Renzo, still wearing his shoes, had stepped on the carpet, with a mess of yarn tangled around his ankle. He had kicked over Valerie's handiwork. Renzo lowered his head, as if he had done something wrong, and didn't speak. Valerie was the first to react, frowning as she pushed the puppy aside and walked over. Why didn't you tell that you would came back tonight? Renzo took a step back. Don't come closer, I smell bad. He was drunk and his speech was slurred. Valerie crouched at his feet. Hey, lift your foot, go sit on the couch. Renzo had made a mistake and obediently let her arrange him. Valerie knelt on the carpet, removing the yarn from his foot. Her thin pajamas were almost transparent, displaying her slender figure in front of him. Renzo closed his eyes and remained silent. Valerie put things away, returned to the living room, and brought a cup of hot water and some hangover medicine. Are you still feeling unwell? Renzo made a sound of agreement. Thank you, I'll rest for a while and then leave. No need. Valerie said stiffly, I'll get you a blanket, you can sleep here. Be careful when you go to the bathroom at night, don't kick it over again. The puppy barked twice in response, as if threatening. Valerie dragged the puppy back, grumbling with dissatisfaction. Stop barking, Daddy needs to sleep. Renzo's heart suddenly skipped a beat, he was its daddy. He had also heard Valerie refer to herself as mommy to the puppy. So, in the latter half of the night, he sat cross-legged on the carpet, knitting a scarf for the puppy. At first, the puppy really disliked him, but later it got tired and lay down next to Renzo. He patiently followed the tutorial, clumsily working with his hands, saying, "Daddy's knitting you a scarf, so you won't be cold." Valerie heard the noise and came out again. Seeing the scene before her, she couldn't help but laugh. What happened after that, Renzo couldn't remember. Because of this drunken misconduct, he didn't go home for several days. They tacitly agreed not to mention that night's events again. But Valerie seemed to treat him a bit differently. Every week, she would make a phone call. For example, asking him to take the puppy for vaccinations or to take it out to play. Renzo had always been content. He felt that this was good enough. But later life told him that actually, it could be even better. Uncle Booth revealed the truth after getting drunk one time. Valerie was also present. That incident, which even he thought was an accident, had actually been orchestrated by Uncle Booth. This happened in the 9th year of their marriage. That night, after leaving the Booth family home, Valerie crouched by the roadside and cried. She cried and apologized to Renzo many times. She also said she wanted to divorce him. In the end, when Valerie was too tired to cry anymore, it was Renzo who carried her to the car. He didn't know what Valerie was really thinking. Did she want to divorce him? That's fine too. Renzo, like a prisoner awaiting execution, numbly accepted his fate. He had accompanied Valerie for 10 years and was content. If Valerie wanted to leave, he should let her go. He carried Valerie to the bedroom while he lay on the couch, closing his eyes to wait for dawn. In the middle of the night, however, he received a light, feather-like kiss. Renzo's eyes flew open, meeting Valerie's panic-stricken gaze at being caught. She tried to run away, but Renzo grabbed her. Renzo's voice was trembling, almost pleading, "Valerie, say something, don't leave like this without any explanation." Valerie struggled a bit, but couldn't break free, and didn't dare to look back. After a while, a small, weak voice lacking confidence came, "If I say I like you, would you hate me?" Renzo felt like he had been hit over the head, his mind buzzing, perhaps he was dreaming again. "No," he said, "if you like me, I would be very happy." This was something he only dared to say in dreams. Then, the subsequent developments spiraled out of control. A soft body threw itself at him, hugging him, with kisses falling on his lips and chest one after another. He was almost passive, fulfilling all her willful requests, like a faithful big dog, devoutly and selflessly loving her. Valerie's hot tears, her hoarse and tender voice, her spine curved like a full moon from surging love, shattered all his rationality. He fell into a paradise of tenderness, his soul joyfully howling. He also said the most outrageous thing in 10 years, "Valerie, please love me." This absurd dream continued until dawn. Renzo closed his eyes, and the moment his consciousness awakened, he fell into an abyss. He had dreamed again. It was still an erotic dream. The pain of unrequited love turned into 1,000 tiny thorns, densely pricking his heart. At the moment when the pain became unbearable, a muffled murmur came from beside his ear. "Renzo." The pain stopped abruptly. He opened his eyes, and the hazy morning light fell on Valerie's sleeping eyelashes. Her forehead was lightly pressed against his arm, her breathing long and steady. Renzo blinked in disbelief, carefully reaching out to brush aside Valerie's soft hair, which also woke her up. The moment Valerie met his gaze, her small face quickly turned red, and she quickly hid herself under the blanket. Inside and outside the blanket, their heartbeats quickened in unison. After a while, Valerie quietly extended her pinky finger from under the blanket, hooking it with his little finger. From the gap came her cautious inquiry, "Shall we have breakfast together?" That year, Renzo was 38 years old. From his youth to middle age, he had waited for Valerie alone through the long years. So, in the midst of the raging fire, Renzo refused to take another step. He didn't want to continue waiting in the rest of his life without Valerie. That would be too bitter. At the moment of the explosion, he tightly embraced Valerie. He only hoped that in their next life, they would be together much earlier. Extra chapter, sweet married life in this life. On a sunny afternoon at Golden Sand Beach, Valerie sat under a beach umbrella, wearing sunglasses and holding a coconut bowl. She claimed to be sunbathing, but in reality, she was quite covered up. Her ruffled swimsuit wrapped most of her skin, only accentuating her perky bottom, adorned with cute little dancing ducks that seemed somewhat childish. She had been lying there for a while. For the past half hour, a group of lively girls next to her had been chattering about the man digging for seashells at the edge of the beach. "He's so handsome. What a great body. Hey, did you see the watch on his wrist? It's very expensive. I'm interested. What kind of girl do you think he likes?" Valerie unconsciously joined their conversation. "He likes beautiful women." Everyone went quiet, looking somewhat surprised at the girl who suddenly chimed in. "What kind of beautiful women?" Valerie thought for a moment. "Those with good figures? Sweet talkers who know how to flatter?" The girls looked at each other, then all turned to Valerie. "Why don't you go ask him?" Valerie sipped her coconut water, then put it down. "All right, if I manage to catch him, he's mine." "Of course. Good luck." With messy hair, she walked up to Renzo. "Hey, handsome." Renzo's gaze, which had been examining seashells, instantly shifted to her, waiting attentively for her to speak. Valerie pointed to the group of beautiful women not far away, saying, "They asked me to come and ask what kind of girls you like." Renzo's eyes remained fixed on Valerie. "Girls like Valerie. Oh my, you're so straightforward. Can I have dinner with you tonight then?" Renzo smiled. "Sure." The group watching from afar saw the girl in the duck swimsuit tilt her head up to say something to the man, and then he took her hand and was pulled away by her. "That easy? I get it, he likes straightforward beautiful women." On Valerie's side, after leading Renzo away from the dangerous area, she peeked into the small bucket. "Are there any red shells?" She had mentioned it casually earlier, and Renzo had picked some up. He said, "Yes, many." Valerie hadn't expected him to actually remember her words, as it was just a casual remark. She lowered her head, carefully wiping the sand off Renzo's hands, blowing them clean. "Don't pick them up next time, I thought you liked collecting shells." "It's okay, I like it." Valerie hummed, narrowing her eyes. "Renzo, what did I say?" Because of his easygoing nature, Valerie had set rules for him. If he didn't like something, he should say he didn't like it. Even if Valerie liked it, he should refuse. Renzo paused, then nodded. "Okay, I won't pick them up next time." This left Valerie completely disarmed. The 6-year age gap made Renzo instinctively accommodate her a lot. She also wanted to do things he liked, but after secretly observing for a long time, it seemed Renzo only liked Valerie. So, she came up with a bold idea. The sea at dusk had a unique beauty. The setting sun kissed the sea's surface, spreading golden scales from the horizon. Valerie chose a private terrace for their dinner location. The dim candlelight flickered in the gentle breeze. After the dishes were served, the waiters gradually withdrew, leaving the rest of the time to them. Valerie wore light makeup, resting her chin on her hand. From across the table, one could see her at her most beautiful. Before long, Renzo felt his throat dry and took a sip of lemon water, secretly urging himself not to be too abrupt. Across from him sat only the adorable Valerie in her little duck swimsuit, nothing more. But in the next second, Valerie gently removed her little duck shawl. "It's so hot." His heart skipped a beat. Renzo instantly realized that when it came to romance, he would always be outmatched by Valerie. Who could have imagined that beneath the cute duck swimsuit was a bikini? "Honey," Valerie leaned closer, staring at him intently. "Your ears are red, you look very hot." She raised a small fan and fanned him, the bell on her wrist tinkling sweetly. Renzo closed his eyes briefly, remembering how that bell had accompanied them through countless nights. Sometimes intense, sometimes slow. His hand clenched tightly. Valerie hadn't eaten yet. She didn't like being hungry, so he had to resist. Renzo opened his eyes, his voice hoarse. "Valerie, let's eat." Valerie looked at him with innocent wide eyes, smiling. "Ah, eat? I am indeed hungry." After speaking, she took a sip of lemon water, the same one Renzo had drunk from. The string in his mind suddenly tightened, his reason teetering on the brink. Renzo took a deep breath and picked up Valerie's steak. "I'll cut it for you." Valerie watched the indifferent Renzo, secretly gritting her teeth. He was quite resistant. Of course, she didn't want to ask him to act directly, because Renzo always obeyed her. But getting him to follow his heart was harder than making a monk break his vows. Renzo placed the cut steak in front of her, but Valerie didn't move. Instead, she stared at him intently. Renzo paused and gave her his own as well. All right, can we eat now? Valerie's gaze became more resentful. Was she going to fail again today? She clearly saw Renzo's ears turn red. How could a flirtatious beauty admit defeat here? My back feels a bit uncomfortable, Valerie said with a frown. Renzo's attention was immediately diverted. He put down his knife and fork. How does it feel uncomfortable? Valerie took the opportunity to move her chair to Renzo's side, sitting with her back to him, brushing her hair aside to expose her smooth back. I think I got sunburned. Renzo fell silent. If he wasn't suffering from dementia, he remembered that Valerie had been hiding under a parasol all afternoon and even wore a shawl. But her pitiful tone really softened his heart. Renzo cleared his throat and asked, "Where does it hurt?" I don't know. Valerie started to act coy, mumbling, "It's just a large area." You can touch it, I'll only know when you touch it. Renzo suppressed the ambiguous emotions in his eyes and placed his palm on Valerie's back. Warm and smooth. The fine down lightly brushed his palm, like millions of silver threads, entangling his heart. Valerie let out a comfortable hum, not speaking for a long time. His rough fingers passed by the back strap several times, not interfering. As if he was really checking her body. Hey, help me apply some repair cream. She took out a tube of creamy ointment and tossed it to Renzo. And carefully instructed, apply it over a large area. Don't miss any spots, otherwise I'll get sunburned. Renzo smiled helplessly. He had never heard of anyone getting sunburned while hiding under a parasol. But he still seriously followed her request, squeezing some cream into his palm, warming it up before gently applying it to her back. The warm breeze was gentle, but Renzo found it increasingly unbearable. Valerie's breathing seemed to deliberately match the movements of his hands, tugging at his heart. Whether it was because of the presence of the cream increasing friction, or because Valerie suddenly changed her posture, the string finally snapped joyfully at some point. The bikini top fell to the ground just like that. Along with it fell what little reason Renzo had left. Amidst Valerie's faint cry of surprise, he picked her up and walked into the room. Valerie held back her laughter, pitifully saying, "We haven't eaten yet, you're so cruel, not letting me eat. You're the one who didn't want to eat." Renzo's gaze darkened, his words becoming much harsher. "You were the one seducing me. I wasn't." Valerie kicked him lightly, stubbornly saying, "It's clearly you who has impure thoughts, don't pin the blame on me." Her eyes curved in a smile, she tilted her head back, with an attitude of "What can you do to me?" Something exploded in Renzo's heart, boiling hot, calling out for revenge. To make her cry and admit her mistake. But at the last moment, his bottom line was still at work, constantly reminding himself to be rational, not to bully Valerie. Renzo. Valerie's voice was like a soft knife, suddenly stabbing into Renzo's heart. "If you don't have anything to do, I'll go eat now. After dinner, I have an appointment to play mahjong, so I might not come back tonight." Before she could finish speaking, Valerie was thrown onto the bed by Renzo. The soft bedding was like clouds, surrounding her. Valerie's eyes were bright and sparkling, her eyelids slightly red, instantly captivating Renzo's reason completely. He no longer had any reservations and kissed her. "Tonight, you're not allowed to go anywhere." Valerie clung to his shoulders, her eyes covered with a layer of mist, still tempting fate. "I don't want to." "I want to." Valerie finally laughed out loud. "I'm your gift, unwrap it however you like." He froze, finally understanding Valerie's intention. He sighed, "Valerie, you're going to be the death of me. Don't you like it?" I like it very much." Valerie stroked his hair, and in the moment before reason disappeared completely, she spoke the words hidden in her heart. "I care about you, so you should learn to express yourself. Maybe I can fulfill your requests too." Renzo's soul suddenly surged at this moment. He indulged in their connection, love surging. Valerie softly curled up in his arms, whispering something, like the secret words of a goddess, making Renzo plunge headlong into the net, obsessed, pursuing, endlessly. In the distance, waves crashed against the shore, piling up snow like foam. The sky was vast, the earth broad. Only here was the refuge of his soul.